Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. I appreciate you being with me. Hope your brand new February month is going really, really great. And where did January go? Wow. Uh, oh, goodness. But life goes right on. And I was telling somebody just the other day, in fact, I said on my YouTube channel just the other day, when you're having fun, life just has a tendency to just go by. And the moments of pure joy, the moments of just thrill are just too brief. But I have the blessed privilege of being one of those few people that absolutely loves what I'm doing. I love being with you every Friday morning. And by the way, let me remind you to be with William Bell on Saturday mornings, okay? On his All Things Fulfilled broadcast here on Now TV. But anyway, as I mentioned, I'm one of the few people in this world that I get up somewhere around 2:30, 3 o'clock of a morning. I'm at my office normally around 3. Now, just this morning, I slept till 3:30 and I felt like a sluggard. So anyway, but I do that because I absolutely love what I'm doing. It's a thrill to get back to the office, to open the Bible, to gather my books around me, to do the research, to dig into God's truth, to understand it better, and to be able to come on here and my YouTube channel, my Facebook, and to be able to share my understanding. And not very many people get to do what they absolutely genuinely love. So I want to thank you for inviting me into your home to share my thoughts with you. All right? Well, listen, we have been involved in a study of the most holy place. And this is all directly tied in with our study of the challenge of Christ. Because here's the deal. Our skeptical friends, atheists, Jews, agnostics, Muslims, as you well know, and I've been pointing out on this channel now for well over 2 years, they tell us that Jesus lied or he failed, and in either case, he is not the Son of God. Why? Well, because he said he was going to come back in the first century, put an end to time and history, destroy the earth, destroy the cosmos, and pretty clearly he didn't do that, right? And so thus, he failed. Far too many believers in Jesus, far too many, do not know how great the challenge is. They don't even know about Jesus' own challenge. When he said, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Well, what were some of the things the Father gave him to do? Well, he sent him to heal, to teach, to perform all sorts of miracles, to verify and to confirm that he's the Son of God. Sent him to die for our sins, to be buried, to be raised the third day. And if he didn't come out of the grave, we're not supposed to believe in him. Do you know, I don't know very many people that would disagree with that statement. Although some years ago I was having a Bible study with a young man. He was actually a seminary student. And we were talking about what essentially was the challenge of Christ. And I posed the question to him. I said, now you would agree with me, would you not, that if Jesus didn't do what he said he was going to do, that he was a liar or a failure? And he said, well, I don't know that I'd agree with that at all. And I said, really? I said, Jesus said he was going to die, be buried, and be raised the third day. And Paul said, if Christ is not risen, your faith is in vain. And this young man goes, but I don't agree with that. And I was literally stunned. I said, wait a minute, what do you mean you don't agree with that? It's what Paul said. If Christ is not risen, your faith is in vain. You are yet in your sins. And he goes, yeah, but like I said, I don't believe that. And I said, well, how do you deny it? He said, well, that might have been true for Paul, but it's not true for me. I said, where do you get to change the rules? The rules are the same. But Jesus not only said he was going to die, be buried, and be raised from the dead, he said, guess what? He was coming back to judge all men in the first century. If he did not do it, he is not the Son of God. So what I've been sharing with you over the last 2 years plus is how to meet the challenge of Christ. One of the things that I've been sharing with you is that the Old Testament set the, quote, appointed time, the kairos, for the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection. And the New Testament writers tell us over and over and over and over again that the appointed time foretold by the Old Testament prophets had arrived. The appointed time for the judgment has arrived. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17. So somehow, some way, we've got to deal with the fact, the indisputable fact, that the New Testament writers all said the appointed time for the end had arrived. Now listen to me, folks, as I've said so often. If our concept of the end is the end of time, the end of earth, the end of the Christian age, even the rule of Christ, then we cannot answer the challenge of Christ, because he unequivocally asserted that those were going to occur in the first century. Undeniable. I don't care what kind of verbal gymnastics you want to engage in, you cannot deny the language. And so, one of the areas of investigation that we've been looking at is the concept found in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. 70 weeks are determined, and it is 6 constituent elements that were to be fulfilled within the 70 weeks of Daniel, Daniel 9. One of those constituent elements was 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy. Well, what does that mean? Well, in my book, Seal It, Vision and Prophecy, which is available from my website, I demonstrate with scholarly quotes across the entire spectrum of the eschatological landscape, amillennialist, postmillennialist, premillennialist, they all agree that to seal vision and prophecy was to bring an end to the prophetic office through the fulfillment of all prophecy. You got to catch the power of this, folks. Daniel was being told that by the end of the 70th week, all prophecy would be fulfilled. Not after the 70th week, not before the 70th week, as so many try to end the 70 weeks before the fall of Jerusalem, but the fall of Jerusalem is very clearly the end of the countdown in Daniel chapter 9. So the end of the 70th week is the time for the fulfilling of all prophecy, and Jesus, speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, which is what Daniel 9, 26 and 27 are describing, Jesus said, "These be the days of vengeance, in which all things that are written must be fulfilled." So here you have Daniel being told that all prophecy would be fulfilled by the end of the 70 weeks. The end of the 70 weeks ends with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And here's Jesus in Luke chapter 21 and verse 22, in describing the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, said, "These be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written must be fulfilled." I'm sorry, folks, it doesn't get much clearer than that. Now then, directly related to this is the subject, obviously, of salvation. man being restored to the presence of God. To put this another way, man being able to enter into the most holy place. Because you see, under the Old Testament tabernacle system, the Old Testament temple system, what do we have? You had the most holy place, which represented the area of earth. Josephus, first century Jewish priestly family, said that the temple itself represented heaven and earth. The holy place represented earth, the residence of men. The most holy place within the veil represented heaven itself, the abode of God. And as long as the first tabernacle stood, as long as the veil stood between them, there was no access to the most holy place. Only the high priest could go into the most holy place one time a year, actually 4 or 5 times during the one day, but one time a year. Other than that, anyone who dared to try to go into the most holy place was to be killed. Nothing but a barrier between heaven and earth. So the story of eschatology, in other words, the story of the challenge of Christ, is the story of the redemption of the relationship, the restoration of the fellowship that existed between heaven and earth. It's not, listen, boy, I hope you'll catch the power of this, okay? I really do. The story of eschatology is not about the end of history, ladies and gentlemen. It's not, quote, historical eschatology, therefore. And yet, 99.9% of all futurist eschatologies say that eschatology is about the end of time. It's about the end of human history. No, it is about the end of the old covenant system that as long as it stood in place, there was no access to the most holy place. This is one of the greatest failures of the skeptics. This is one of the greatest failures of many Jesus Christ believing, Bible loving people. They believe the story of eschatology is about the end of history. So when the atheist comes along, the skeptic comes along and says, well, yeah, eschatology is about the end of history. And Jesus said he was coming back in the first century to put an end to history. At the end of the age, he did not do it, therefore he lied. And if you, as a Bible believer, do not understand that the restoration of the fellowship between heaven and earth is the story of eschatology, and the restoration of that fellowship would be when that old covenant system was done away with. That shows, and by the way, this is Hebrews chapter 9, 6 to 10. As long as that first tabernacle and as long as that veil stood, as long as as that old covenant system stood imposed, from the Greek word epikaimai, legally imposed, as long as it had standing, from the Greek word stasin, meaning legal standing. So as long as the old covenant system stood, please pay attention now, as long as the old covenant system stood, not as long as the Christian age stands, not as long as time stands, but as long as the old covenant system stood, there was no access to the most holy place. There was no salvation. There was no restoration between heaven and earth. But Christ was going to come the second time to bring salvation. What does that mean? He was going to come to restore the relationship between heaven and earth. To do what? Take away the old covenant. Because as long as it stood, no access to the most holy place. Do you see what we're saying here, ladies and gentlemen? Now, got to hurry here to go back to the book of Revelation to show you not only what Hebrews said. Hebrews said, the Holy Spirit is indicating this, that the way into the most holy place is not yet manifest while the first tabernacle is still standing, having standing. That first covenant, that first system, stood only in meats and drinks and carnal washings imposed on them until the time of Reformation. Well, the time of Reformation is when access into the most holy place would be opened, when the fellowship between heaven and earth would be restored. So the time of Reformation is the time of entrance into the most holy place, entrance into the presence of God. That's the time of salvation. That's resurrection. So when would resurrection come? Not at the end of history, but at the end of the Old Covenant age, which prevented access into the most holy place, into the presence of God. So as I said, let's go back to the book of Revelation to see if we can button this down a little bit tighter. You know, in a previous video, I had to end, right there, real sharp ending to it as I was tying the pieces together. Revelation chapter 11, John said he saw the temple of God in heaven, and there he saw the ark of the testimony in the temple. Now, the word that he uses for temple is naos, the most holy place. You see, the Jews had two Greek words for temple, hairon, that's the holy place, the outer temple, and naos is the inner court, the most holy place. So John says he saw the temple open. Naos is open. The most holy place is open. And there's the ark of the testimony. Oh, but wait. Revelation chapter 15 and verse 8, John said once again, I saw the ark, or the temple of God open, the naos opened. And there's that ark of the testimony again. However, no man could enter in until the wrath of God was finished. Now, I want you to think about this with me. Hebrews chapter 9, no man could enter into the most holy place, into the presence of God, as long as the old covenant stood valid, as long as the old covenant was imposed, legally imposed. Now, in Revelation, and I think Revelation and Hebrews are basically synchronous books. They both speak of the exact same things. Haven't quite made up my mind whether I think Hebrews was written first and Revelation draws from it, or whether Revelation was written first and Hebrews builds on it. Haven't quite made up my mind on that. J. Stuart Russell believes that Revelation was written prior to Hebrews. Okay, it's a thought and it's possible. Nonetheless, one more time, book of Hebrews, no access to the most holy place while the old covenant system stood. And let me drive this point home, ladies and gentlemen. The removal of the old covenant system would allow access to the most holy place. It is not the destruction of literal physical heaven and earth. It's not the destruction of the cosmos. It is not the end of time that allows access into the most holy place. It's the end of the old covenant. That's covenant eschatology, not historical eschatology. And let me say again, this is what's wrong with the skeptics, the atheists, the Muslims. They see eschatology as historical instead of covenantal. When you misidentify the nature of eschatology, and identify it as historical instead of covenantal, you are bound to have a failed eschatology. Period. End of story. Okay, very quickly, back to Revelation. So John sees the temple open, the naos, the most holy place, open in heaven, signifying that something great is about to happen. Because that naos is not supposed to be open for viewing. But now it is open, but Revelation chapter 15 and verse 8 tells us that no man could enter into the naos, the most holy place, until the wrath of God was completed. Well, guess what? Then, in chapter 16 and following, John sees the 7 bowls of God's wrath. Okay, are you following? No man could enter into the most holy place, the naos, until the wrath of God is poured out. Chapter 16, here's 7 bowls, 7 vials containing the wrath of God. And those vials are about to be poured out. Meaning that when the 7th bowl is poured out, man could enter into the most holy place. Now listen, folks, the implications of this for eschatology are profound. You know why? Because the great majority of believers today tell us the book of Revelation is not fulfilled. And yet those same individuals, when you ask them, when a child of God dies today, do they go to heaven or do they go to Hades and wait? And they say unequivocally, oh, you get to go to heaven. Oh, really? Follow me here. No man could enter into the most holy place until the wrath of God contained in the 7 bowls was finished. We're not going to go through the 6 bowls leading up to the 7th. The 7th is the last bowl. The 7th bowl is poured out on the great city Babylon. Do you see a train coming? I sure hope you do. So let me reiterate. The very people who tell us that the book of Revelation is not fulfilled, the very people who tell us that Babylon is literal Babylon in Iraq, well, that kind of went by the wayside, didn't it? Or they tell us that Babylon is the Islamic nation, like Jonathan Kahn has been doing over the last couple of years. One of the most ridiculous arguments, one of the most ridiculous ideas that's ever been set forth. Or we're told that Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand, John was told no man could enter heaven, the most holy place, until the wrath of God was poured out. The wrath of God would be poured out on Babylon. So if you put Babylon in our future, okay, and you say it's the destruction of the Roman Catholic Church, or if you say that it's some future destruction of a rebuilt literal city of Babylon, or if you say that it's Islam, I don't care what you identify Babylon as. You know, there was for a good little while the idea that Babylon was New York or New Jersey. Doesn't matter wherever you put it, and wherever you put it off into our future, the destruction of Babylon, that is where man can enter heaven. And yet, I gotta drive this home. The very people who tell us that Babylon is Roman Catholic Church or Iraq or New York or whoever, and that Revelation is not fulfilled, those very people tell us that when the faithful child of God dies, they go to heaven. You hear that train? Folks, you cannot affirm that Babylon is some future entity without saying that when a Christian dies, they don't get to go to heaven. They either go just simply to the grave and be like Rover, dead all over, or they go to Hades and wait, perhaps, as I've always believed, in Abraham's bosom, a place of rest and consolation. Okay? One more time, let me reiterate that. You cannot put Babylon out in the future without saying that when the Christian dies, they do not go to heaven. And yet the huge majority of Christians today, when you ask them, when a faithful child of God dies today, where do they go? Oh, undoubtedly they go to heaven. Okay, then Babylon has been destroyed, because who is Babylon? Babylon is the city that killed the Old Covenant prophets, Revelation 16 and verse 6. Guess what? Rome never killed an Old Testament prophet. Rome never killed the apostles and prophets of Jesus. Even the Jews were responsible for the killing of Peter and Paul. Literal Iraq never killed an Old Testament prophet. Islam never killed an Old Testament prophet. So whoever Babylon is, that would be the brunt of the final outpouring of God's wrath of the seventh bowl. She had to have been guilty of killing the Old Testament prophets. There's only one city in all of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, that was guilty of killing the Old Testament prophets. That was Old Covenant Jerusalem. Secondly, Babylon is the city, the great city, quote, where the Lord was crucified, unquote. Revelation 11, chapter 11, verse 8. New York didn't kill Jesus. It's not where Jesus was killed. Rome is not where the Lord was crucified. You get the point? Thirdly, Babylon is the city that killed the apostles and prophets of Jesus. And Jesus himself said of Jerusalem, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that kills the prophets and kills those who are sent unto them. How often I would have gathered you together as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you would not." Folks, there's only one city that was Babylon, that was Old Covenant Jerusalem. That means that entrance into the most holy place, heaven itself, was only opened at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That destroys the idea that eschatology is about the end of history. It is covenant eschatology.